"Harold, are you sure you locked the truck?" My wife, Evelyn, called out as I hoisted another box onto my shoulder. I looked back at our moving truck, parked on the driveway. "Yes, honey, locked it after the last load," I said, patting my pocket for good measure. The jingle of keys reassured me. We just moved into the neighborhood, a typical American suburb, if anything is typical anymore. White picket fences, flower beds blooming in vibrant summer colors, kids playing catch on manicured lawns. My daughter Chloe skipped alongside me, her 6-year-old face glowing with the thrill of exploration. Benjamin, our 14-year-old, was less thrilled, sulking behind me, phone in hand, texting his city friends. "Who's that?" Chloe tugged on my shirt, pointing toward a plump, elderly lady bustling toward us from across the street. She wore a floral dress, a wide-brimmed sun hat, and a pair of gardening gloves clutched in one hand. I squinted against the sun. "I guess that's our welcoming committee, kiddo." Evelyn was the first to greet her. "Hi, I'm Evelyn Spencer, and this is my husband, Harold, and our kids, Benjamin and Chloe." She introduced us all with a flourish of her hand, her smile wide and welcoming. The woman returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Mrs. Gable. I live just across the street. Welcome to our neighborhood." Her voice was warm, her accent the crisp remnants of what might once have been European. "Our community has certain rules," she continued, her smile wavering slightly. "I'm sure you'll respect them as we do." Something about her emphasis on rules made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Then she launched into a detailed explanation of everything. Trash pickup days, quiet hours, pet protocols, gardening guidelines. Chloe nodded enthusiastically. Benjamin rolled his eyes when she mentioned the 9 PM music curfew. I shared a glance with Evelyn. "Well, Mrs. Gable?" Evelyn finally managed, once the torrent of instructions had ended. "We appreciate your guidance. We're looking forward to becoming a part of this community." "Yes, of course," Mrs. Gable said, her gaze sweeping over us, lingering on Benjamin's skateboard. "We all are," she added as she strode away, her gardening gloves already back on. I couldn't shake off an eerie feeling. The echo of her words, the obsession with these rules, lingered in the air. "Something's off about her, don't you think?" I asked Evelyn once we were alone. She shrugged, her smile a little forced. "No, I guess she just wants to keep the neighborhood nice." "Harold, it's a little overbearing, sure, but we'll get used to it," she said. I nodded, not entirely convinced. With one last look at Mrs. Gable's retreating figure, I turned back toward the moving truck, my mind still teeming with the rules we were now obliged to follow. Life moves quickly in the suburbs. Before I knew it, a month had passed. Our house no longer echoed with emptiness. The rooms filled with our laughter, chatter, and the occasional argument. But not everything was as idyllic as it seemed when we first moved in. I was sipping my morning coffee, looking out the window at our pristine neighborhood, when I noticed the Miller's house. It was as lovely as the others, but their garbage bins were still out, even though trash collection had been yesterday. I shook my head, remembering Mrs. Gable's strict rules about garbage cans. By evening, the bins were still there. I spotted Mrs. Gable glaring at them from her porch, a grim expression on her face. It was the last time anyone saw the Millers. The next morning, their house was empty, the bins neatly tucked away. There was no sign of the Millers, no moving van, no farewell. They'd simply vanished. My fingers trembled as I dialed the local police station. Evelyn watched me, her eyes filled with worry. A brisk voice answered. "Maplewood Police Station, Officer Davis speaking. How can I assist you?" "Hi, Officer Davis," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name's Harold Spencer. I'm calling from Pine Ridge Drive." "Oh, the new family. How can we assist you, Mr. Spencer?" "There's something strange going on," I said, taking a deep breath. "Our neighbors, the Millers, they've disappeared." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Disappeared, Mr. Spencer?" "Yes. Their house is empty. There was no moving truck, no notice. They're just gone." I could hear the shuffle of papers in the background. "And when was the last time you saw them?" "Yesterday morning, I guess. They left their garbage bins out against neighborhood rules," he finished for me. There was something in his tone, an indifference, perhaps, that sent a chill down my spine. "Yes," I confirmed, feeling a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "Shouldn't someone check on them?" "Well, Mr. Spencer," he said after a brief pause, "people move all the time. We'll certainly look into it, but there may be a simple explanation." "I hope you're right, Officer Davis," I said, my throat dry. "But it just doesn't feel right." "We'll handle it, Mr. Spencer," he assured me. But his words did little to quell the rising tide of anxiety within me as I hung up. Evelyn looked at me, her face pale. "They will look into it, right?" "They said they would," I replied. But even to my own ears, my words sounded hollow. Evelyn's eyes met mine, searching for reassurance that I was struggling to provide. We tried to go about our day, attempting to inject some semblance of normalcy into our lives. But the house felt different, tainted by the mystery that had unfolded down the street. Evelyn cooked dinner, her movements robotic. Benjamin was unusually quiet, his phone forgotten on the table. Chloe, sensing our tension, clung to her stuffed teddy bear, her bright eyes clouded with confusion. We slept fitfully that night, our dreams plagued by shadowy figures and disappearing neighbors. The once comforting silence of the suburbs now felt oppressive, the tranquility deceptive. Days turned into a week, but there was no update from the police. I called Officer Davis again, my patience wearing thin. His response remained frustratingly non-committal. "They're looking into it," he assured me. But there was no trace of the Millers. Their records indicated they'd sold their house overnight. But there was no new address, no forwarding information, as if they'd simply vanished into thin air. Oddly enough, the neighborhood remained largely unfazed by the Millers' abrupt departure. On one of our neighborhood walks, I finally mustered the courage to ask Mrs. Gable about the Millers. She was dressed in her usual morning attire, a bright tracksuit that starkly contrasted with her stern demeanor. "Mrs. Gable," I began, my voice steady, "do you know anything about the Millers? They've disappeared." "You know," she said, not missing a beat, continuing her brisk pace, "people move all the time, Harold." I slowed down, forcing her to stop. "But without a trace? Mrs. Gable, doesn't that seem strange to you?" She turned to face me, her icy blue eyes meeting mine. "They weren't very fond of the rules, Harold. Perhaps they found a place more suited to their habits." Her words hung heavy in the morning air. I stared at her, unable to shake off the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. "But the police have no record of the move, no new address." I pushed further, my unease growing. For the first time, I saw a crack in her otherwise calm demeanor. A flicker of something crossed her eyes, but it was gone before I could decipher it. People have a way of slipping through the cracks, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's not our place to question it. But I began, but she cut me off. It's time to move on, Harold. This is a peaceful neighborhood. Let's keep it that way. Her tone left no room for further discussion. As we resumed our walk, I couldn't help but feel a cold shiver run down my spine. Her words, while seemingly harmless, were cloaked in a chilling finality. It was clear that the Miller disappearance wasn't up for discussion, but the questions remained, gnawing at me. What happened to the Millers? And why was everyone so unwilling to talk about it? The day following my unsettling conversation with Mrs. Gable began with an unusual commotion. Buddy, our family's golden retriever, known for his gentle demeanor, was in a state of visible distress. His barks echoed through our house, shattering the calm of the early morning. I followed the sound, finding Buddy in our backyard, his paws frantically working at the soft earth. His brown eyes were filled with a mix of excitement and confusion as he continued to dig. His normally fluffy tail was stiff with tension. I assumed he was after a squirrel, or perhaps one of the kids' balls that had found its way into a hidden burrow. But when I approached, what I saw in the hole sent a cold shiver down my spine. It wasn't a furry creature or a lost toy. It was a bone, unmistakably human. My heart pounded in my chest. I scooped up Buddy, his body still quivering with anxiety, and carried him back inside. The dirt from his paws left muddy smears on our kitchen tiles, but I barely noticed. I found Evelyn in the living room, folding laundry. "Evelyn," I managed to croak out, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. She turned around, her eyes widening at the sight of Buddy in my arms and the pale look on my face. Her gaze followed mine as I nodded toward the backyard, my mouth suddenly too dry to form words. We exchanged a look of growing horror, the same dread reflected in each other's eyes. Chloe and Benjamin, curious about the commotion, wandered into the room, their faces whitening as they took in our expressions. "What is it, Dad?" Benjamin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something in the backyard," I managed to stammer out. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filled with understanding. "What do we do, Harold?" she asked, her voice trembling. I could see her mind racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation. But the bone in our backyard was beyond logic. I'll call the police," I started, my mind swirling with horrifying possibilities. With my heart pounding in my chest, I pulled out my phone and dialed the police station. The ring sounded deafening in the quiet house. Evelyn held on to Buddy, her face pale, as Benjamin and Chloe huddled close to her. The sound of police sirens in the distance was both relieving and terrifying as their flashing lights washed over our house. I couldn't help but feel like we'd crossed the point of no return. 2 officers stepped out of the car, their faces grim. One of them was Officer Davis, and the other was a woman I didn't recognize. They approached the house, their steps measured, the gravel crunching under their heavy boots. "Mr. Spencer," Officer Davis greeted me as I opened the door. "May we see the discovery?" I nodded, leading them to the backyard. Their faces hardened as they took in the sight of the bone, their earlier skepticism replaced with grim acceptance. They started securing the area with yellow crime scene tape, marking off a perimeter that encompassed not just the hole Buddy had dug, but a generous area around it. Officer Davis stepped away to make a phone call. His words were hushed and hurried as he spoke into his radio. The female officer, who I now knew as Officer Ramirez, stood watch over the scene, her eyes never leaving the ominous hole in our backyard. Within minutes, more officials arrived. A crime scene unit van pulled up, and 2 forensics investigators climbed out. They carried with them a toolbox of sorts, and they approached the bone with somber professionalism. They started by photographing the scene from multiple angles, capturing the bone's position in relation to the house and the rest of the yard. Then, one of them began to carefully excavate around the bone, using small tools that reminded me of a paleontologist's kit. They worked with meticulous care, preserving every grain of dirt as they slowly unearthed more of the bone. As they proceeded, their expressions darkened, confirming our worst fears. After what felt like an eternity, they finally extracted the bone and placed it into an evidence bag. As they sealed it, Officer Davis approached me. "Mr. Spencer," he said, "we're going to need to bring this in for analysis. We'll keep you updated on our findings." I nodded, my mouth dry, as I watched them pack up and leave. The last traces of the afternoon sun painted the sky with hues of orange and pink. I glanced at Benjamin, our teenage son. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by a sad expression. His phone, usually a permanent fixture in his hand, lay forgotten in his pocket. His gaze was fixed on the now empty patch of grass that just hours earlier had held a chilling secret. "That's it," Benjamin said, breaking the silence that had fallen over us after the authorities' departure. His voice had a hardened edge. His eyes were still focused on the backyard. "We should leave. We can't stay here after that." He gestured vaguely toward the spot where the bone had been found. But Evelyn surprised us both. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the hint of fear I knew was lurking beneath her firm tone. "We're not running away. We're not going to let this situation drive us from our home. We'll cooperate with the police and help them find out what happened." Benjamin opened his mouth, ready to challenge her, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Enough. We're not making any rash decisions. We stay. We stand our ground. We figure out what's going on here." I saw the determination in her gaze, the resolve that had always been one of her strongest traits. I admired her strength, even as my own fears threatened to bubble over. But despite her brave front, I caught a glimpse of the fear in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the terrifying mystery that was unfolding around us. We settled into bed that night, the comforting familiarity of our room doing little to quell the anxiety gnawing at us. The day's events replayed in my mind, a horrifying movie on a loop. The image of that unearthed bone, the memory of the miller's abrupt disappearance, and the disconcerting calm of our neighbors, all combined into a chilling narrative. The next morning, Evelyn and I decided to confront Mrs. Gable. Our fear-laden night and Benjamin's insistence that something was seriously wrong in our neighborhood pushed us to confront the woman who seemed to hold some invisible reign over our community. I knocked on Mrs. Gable's door, feeling the unease churning in my stomach. When she opened the door, her usually warm smile was replaced by a tight-lipped frown. "Harold, Evelyn," she said, nodding at us both. "Is there something wrong?" We exchanged a glance before I spoke. "Mrs. Gable, there's something strange going on in this neighborhood, and we can't ignore it." Her brow creased slightly, but her tone remained cool as she replied, "Strange? I'm not sure I follow." Evelyn stepped forward, her fear replaced by determination. "People are disappearing, Mrs. Gable. The Millers, for example. They're just gone." Mrs. Gable chuckled, a hollow sound that did nothing to ease our tension. "My dear," she said, looking at Evelyn, This is a close-knit community, not some city full of strangers. People here value their privacy. Maybe the Millers moved for a reason. That doesn't mean anything sinister is happening. But the bone, I interjected, found in our backyard. It's not normal. She waved a dismissive hand. Probably some animal. You city folks have a knack for overreacting. With that, she shut the door, leaving us standing on her porch. Meanwhile, Benjamin refused to accept Mrs. Gable's response. He started his own investigation, talking to the neighborhood kids under the guise of making friends. His laptop became his detective notepad. He spent hours browsing through local news sites and public records, hunting for any information that might shed light on what was going on. A couple of days later, we got a knock on our door. It jolted me from the novel I was reading. My heart pounded in response to the unexpected sound. With a quick glance at Evelyn, I got up and made my way to the front door. Opening it, I found Mrs. Gable standing on our porch. The warm summer evening did nothing to soften her stern expression. Her usual friendly demeanor was absent, replaced by a coldness that sent a shiver down my spine. "I noticed your car on the street, Harold," she said, her tone frosty as her gaze pierced me. "You know the rules." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Evelyn had parked her car on the street earlier in the afternoon because our driveway was filled with the kids' bikes and toys, a harmless oversight on any other day in any other neighborhood. But not here, not with Mrs. Gable watching. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Gable," I replied, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. "It's just that our driveway was full, and we didn't think—" She didn't let me finish. Her gaze was penetrating. "Make sure it doesn't happen again," she warned, her words hanging in the air like a threat. With that, she turned on her heel, walking back toward her house with a rigid posture that mirrored her icy warning. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer, watching her until she disappeared into her house. With a sigh, I closed the door, feeling a shiver of unease that lingered long after her departure. The threat in Mrs. Gable's warning was unspoken, but clear. It was a wake-up call, a chilling reminder of the neighborhood rules and the price of breaking them. The question now was, how far would she go to enforce her rules? And were we really safe in our own home? As we settled into bed that night, our car now safely parked in the driveway, the feeling of being watched permeated the darkness. Our once comforting home felt different, tinged with an unease that neither Evelyn nor I could shake off. Benjamin walked into the living room one evening, his face serious and a hint of worry in his eyes. He was carrying his laptop, the glow from the screen illuminating his face in the dimly lit room. Evelyn and I exchanged a worried glance before joining him, our hearts heavy with a sense of foreboding. "Dad, Mom, I think you need to see this," Benjamin started, setting his laptop on the coffee table. His fingers danced over the keyboard, pulling up a series of articles and records he'd bookmarked. "I've been talking to some kids around here and doing some online digging," he continued. His voice, usually so full of youthful energy, was uncharacteristically somber. He clicked on a link, and a news article from the early 1990s popped up on the screen. The headline talked about a man who disappeared without a trace, a resident of our neighborhood. He clicked again, and another article from the early 2000s came up, detailing a similar incident. He kept clicking, revealing more and more articles, each about a person who lived in our neighborhood and vanished without a trace. "It's not just the Millers," Benjamin said, looking up at us. "This has been happening for decades. Everyone who disappeared broke some neighborhood rule." He clicked again, and a detailed spreadsheet filled the screen. Benjamin had recorded every disappearance he could find, correlating them with any rule-breaking incident he could dig up. The pattern was undeniable. "But that's not all," Benjamin said. He clicked on another bookmark, bringing up an article from over 30 years ago. He magnified it on his screen. The headline read, "Prominent local attorney vanishes without a trace." The date stamp indicated it was a piece from over 2 decades ago. As we huddled together, reading the faded words, a chilling sense of dread enveloped us. The local community was reeling from the sudden disappearance of a prominent criminal defense attorney, Mr. Arthur Gable, who was last seen leaving his suburban home late Sunday evening, the article began. Mr. Gable, 54, was well respected in his field, known for his strong commitment to justice and the rule of law. The piece included a quote from Mrs. Gable herself, who, at the time, said, "It's unlike Arthur to just leave without a word. He was a man of principles and integrity. He had recently been struggling with some personal issues, but I never imagined he would just vanish." As we read further, we learned that a few weeks prior to his disappearance, Mrs. Gable had accused him of breaking their marital vows. Friends and colleagues quoted in the piece suggested that the allegations had left Mr. Gable distraught and embarrassed. No charges were pressed, and no public scandal followed. The article continued. It seemed the couple was handling matters privately, but his sudden disappearance has raised concerns. The article concluded with a plea from the local police for any information regarding Mr. Gable's whereabouts. But it was clear from our current knowledge that he was never found. The parallels were undeniable and frightening. The man who stood for law and rules disappeared after breaking a rule set by his wife, Mrs. Gable. The same Mrs. Gable who now insisted on the neighborhood's strict adherence to her set of rules. The same woman whose stern gaze had become a daily reminder of the danger we'd stepped into. Our fears were no longer mere suspicions. We were convinced we were in danger, that every rule we broke edged us closer to becoming the next to vanish. Our only recourse was the authorities. So, armed with Benjamin's findings, we approached the police again. We decided to go to the police station the very next morning. Benjamin's laptop was tucked under my arm. Evelyn and Benjamin followed right behind me. We walked into the local precinct. The officer on duty looked up from his desk as we entered. I recognized him from when we reported the bone found in our backyard. "Officer Franklin, back again, Spencers?" he asked, a mixture of concern and curiosity playing across his face. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "We have something you need to see." We laid the whole story in front of him, our words tumbling out in a hurried rush. We told him about the neighborhood's strange rules and the disappearing families. Then finally, we revealed Benjamin's discovery about Mrs. Gable's late husband. Benjamin opened his laptop and brought up the old news article. Officer Franklin read it, his brow furrowed in concentration. His eyes flickered up to meet ours several times as he digested the information, but he didn't interrupt. When he was finished, he leaned back in his chair, a deep sigh escaping him. "This is troubling," he admitted, "but it's still not solid proof. It's circumstantial at best." "But it's a lead," Evelyn interjected, her voice shaky but insistent. "Surely it warrants an investigation." Officer Franklin rubbed his forehead, looking every bit as worried as we felt. "I understand your concerns, truly," he said. "But we can't take action based on assumptions and old stories. We need solid proof." His words hit us like a punch to the gut. We'd come here hoping for help, for action. But instead, we were leaving with nothing. His words hung heavy in the air as we left the station, the sinking feeling of desperation gnawing at us. But we didn't have time to dwell on it. Mrs. Gable was growing suspicious, her watchful eyes following our every move with a sharpness that was hard to ignore. We noticed it one evening as Evelyn and I sat on the porch, the cool breeze failing to ease our simmering anxieties. Across the street, Mrs. Gable was taking her evening walk, her gaze fixed on our house. She was carrying a small notebook, and we caught her jotting something down before she moved along, her gaze finally leaving our home. She also began to host more community gatherings, small tea parties and barbecues, a move that seemed innocent on the surface, but carried an undercurrent of surveillance. It was as if she was drawing the neighborhood closer, asserting her authority, ensuring no one strayed. The gatherings also served another purpose. They offered Mrs. Gable a chance to reinforce the neighborhood rules, to remind everyone of the consequences of breaking them. The reminders were subtle, woven into pleasant conversations and friendly advice. But the threat underneath was real. One day, Evelyn found a note in our mailbox, a stern warning about a stray garden hose left out in our yard, a violation of the rules. The note was unsigned, but the handwriting matched that of Mrs. Gable. The message was clear. We were being watched, and every minor infraction was being noted. What scared us the most was the night we caught her outside our house well past midnight. I spotted her silhouetted in the moonlight, standing across the street, her gaze fixed on our home. When I confronted her, she brushed it off as a late-night walk. But the icy stare she gave me before she left made it clear that her actions were far from innocent. These weren't just steps to maintain a perfect image. They were warnings. We gathered in the living room after dinner, the atmosphere heavy with a tension that had become all too familiar these past few weeks. Benjamin was fidgeting with his laptop, and Evelyn was squeezing her hands. Chloe, thankfully, was asleep. "We can't just sit around," Evelyn finally said, breaking the silence. "We need to do something." I looked at her, my heart heavy with fear and worry. I couldn't bear the thought of putting my family in danger. But I knew she was right. We couldn't let Mrs. Gable continue with her horrifying deeds. "What do you propose?" I asked, my voice sounding more composed than I felt. Evelyn glanced at Benjamin, who was now looking up from his laptop, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "We set a trap," she said, her voice steady. "We break a rule and wait for her to act." I felt a chill run down my spine. The idea was risky, terrifying even, but it could also be our only chance to catch Mrs. Gable. Benjamin was quick to jump in. "We can have everything on video. I can set up cameras around the house." We spent the next hour hashing out the details. We decided on the rule to break, parking our car on the street. It was a minor infraction, but obvious enough that Mrs. Gable wouldn't miss it. Benjamin got the idea to message one of his new neighborhood friends, whose dad was a local detective, for some help. "David," Benjamin typed, "I need your help, and I might need your dad's help too." There was a pause, then David's response flashed on the screen. "Sure thing, Benjamin. What's up?" Benjamin glanced at me, and I gave him a nod. It was time. He took a deep breath before starting to type again, laying out our situation as quickly and clearly as he could, talking about Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood rules, the disappearances, and our suspicions. As he wrapped up, there was another pause. It was a lot to process, and we were asking David and his dad to get involved in a potentially dangerous situation. I held my breath, waiting for the response. Finally, it came. This is crazy, Benjamin. But I believe you. I'll talk to my dad and get back to you. True to his word, David got back to us later in the evening. His dad, Detective Miller, wanted to meet us the following morning. Meeting Detective Miller was a relief. He listened to our story, his face serious. He agreed to help us, but emphasized the need for concrete evidence. When we told him about our plan to trap Mrs. Gable, he was understandably concerned, but he also understood why we felt we needed to do this. "I'll be ready," he said, looking each of us in the eye. "The moment you see her act, call me. I'll be there as fast as I can." With David and his father on board, our plan moved into action. That evening, I deliberately parked our car on the street. Benjamin, having rigged our house with hidden cameras, monitored every movement from his room. Evelyn and I watched from the window, our hearts pounding as night descended on the neighborhood. Midnight struck, and our once serene street was bathed in an eerie quiet. And then we saw her. Mrs. Gable, cloaked in darkness, stepped out of her house and made her way toward ours. Benjamin, his eyes glued to the screen, gave us a play-by-play. "She's approaching the car," he whispered into his phone, ensuring Detective Miller was in the loop. The anticipation was suffocating. We watched as Mrs. Gable approached our car, carrying a large bag. She glanced around before kneeling beside our vehicle. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded our front yard. From the shadows, Detective Miller emerged, his authoritative voice echoing in the silent street. "Mrs. Gable, you're under arrest." In the harsh light, we saw it, the pure shock on Mrs. Gable's face. But it was quickly replaced by a strange calmness as she was handcuffed and led away. After Mrs. Gable was led away in handcuffs, our once quiet street became a flurry of activity. Police cars lined the street, and officers searched through Mrs. Gable's house. As the police searched Mrs. Gable's house, they discovered a chilling collection of evidence that painted a grim picture of her reign of terror. In her basement, they uncovered the personal belongings of numerous residents who had disappeared over the years. Watches, pieces of clothing, and even family photographs. Each marked with the date of the rule violation and the date of disappearance. The detectives found a hidden room filled with meticulously kept records of the neighborhood's activities. Every small rule violation was cataloged, paired with a chilling comment by Mrs. Gable about how they had disturbed the peace and unity of her perfect neighborhood. Perhaps the most chilling discovery of all, however, was Mrs. Gable's diary. In its pages, she detailed her obsession with maintaining order and the steps she took to enforce it. She wrote candidly about her late husband's betrayal and the vows she made to never let anyone disrupt her idealized view of her community. She saw her actions not as crimes, but as necessary measures to protect her vision of perfection. Detective Miller returned to our house, his face stern, but his eyes kind. He reassured us that they were doing everything they could to unravel the full extent of Mrs. Gable's crimes. In the coming weeks, she would be questioned, her house would be thoroughly investigated, and any missing persons cases within the neighborhood would be re-examined in light of our revelations. In the meantime, we were advised to stay vigilant and to try to return to some sense of normalcy. "It's going to be a long process, Mr. Spencer," Detective Miller told us, "but you've done your part. It's time for us to do ours." Months after Mrs. Gable's arrest, our neighborhood had begun to find its new rhythm. The investigation into her crimes had led to a horrifying series of revelations. Mrs. Gable was charged with multiple counts of murder and kidnapping, each linked to her twisted idea of maintaining the neighborhood's perfect image. As these charges were read aloud during her trial, we, the residents, watched, seeing justice being served. It brought a sense of closure. The empty gable house was sold. The new family that moved in was welcomed with open arms. The laughter of children playing in the streets, the sight of neighbors chatting over fences, the sense of community at our gatherings. These were the things that defined us now, not the ghost of Mrs. Gable's rule.